All right, so I'm going to learn a very fundamental discussion about what Chanukah is all about. It's in Kutasichas Chiluk Yud. It says in Masechta Shabbos, what is Chanukah? Answers the Tal Gemara. When the Greeks entered the Beis HaMikdash and they contaminated all the oil in the Beis HaMikdash, subsequent to this, the Malchus Beis Chashmonai, the Kohanim in the family of Chashmonai, were victorious over the Greeks. They searched throughout the Beis HaMikdash, and they couldn't find anything more than one cruse of oil, which was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. They only had enough to have light for one day. A miracle happened, and it lasted for 8 days. The next year, says the Talmud, they established this day as a yontif, these days as a yontif, days of Hallel and thanks. That's the words of the Gemara. The Tur, the name of Maram Rothenburg, writes that all the meals that we have on Chanukah are meals that are not considered meals of mitzvah. Why? Because the sages, the Gemara says, only made these days to be days of thanks and praise, but not mishta v'simcha, not days of festivity, and therefore the meals that we make are not considered meals of mitzvah. Rather, they're considered meals that you do because you want to do them, not because you have to. That's what the Tur writes. The Rambam disagrees. The Rambam writes, the Chachamim in that generation established that these days should be days of simcha and halal. Simcha doesn't just mean happiness in language of halacha. Simcha means days of festivity, of days of when you're supposed to have a festive meal. The Maharshal explains, according to Rambam, the meals that we eat in Chanukah are Sudas mitzvah. They are absolutely a mitzvah to have. So the question is, on the Rambam, the Gemara doesn't mention the word simcha. The Gemara just says hal ve'dah, days of praise and thanks. How does the Rambam know that these are called days of joy, days when you're supposed to have festive meals, when it doesn't say so in the Gemara? Parenthetically, I just want to mention that the Rebbe said that it's important that we should make meals on Chanukah. The Rebbe said that because there's greater darkness, therefore there should be more light, and therefore we have to specifically go out of our way to make festivities and make parties and make festive meals. The Rebbe actually said, if I remember correctly, it was a Gemara Yerushalmi that was quoting the Rebbe made a Fabrengen in the last day of Chanukah, 1978. By the way, the Yonatan Malnger Baruch Hashem is inspiring our Chassidus with a little bit of Baruch Hashem in the background. Anyway, so of course. Anyways, so the Rebbe said at that occasion that that someone sent him, or he discovered himself, I don't remember, a Gemara Yerushalmi, where Gemara Yerushalmi says that if you miss Al Nissim, you have to say benching again, which indicates that it's when you have to bench again if you miss a Yal V'Yav. To miss it when it's the difference between the obligation of benching when we have to repeat benching, if we forget Al V'Yav, in days that we don't have to repeat benching, we forget Yal V'Yav. It has to do with the obligation of the meal. If the meal is considered a mitzvah, so then if you get Yal V'Yav, you have to repeat benching again. So a similar way, the Gemara Yerushalmi says, if you forget Al Nissim, you have to bench again. Although that's not the halacha, the Rebbe said that for me, there was Kamoitze Shalol Rav. This was like finding a great bounty, great spoils of war, because this supports this idea of how important it is to have meals on Yom Tov. But we're going back to the source. The Torah says it's not a mitzvah. The Ram says it is a mitzvah, and the question is, how does Ram get this? There's another difference between what the Rambam writes and what the Gemara writes. The Gemara says, what is Chanukah? They only had one cruse of oil. A miracle happened. It lasted for 8 days. The next year, they made this a day of holiday. These days of holiday. That means that the miracle was established not because they were victorious over the Greeks, rather it was because only of discovering the cruse of oil, and it's lasting for 8 days. The miracle is about the menorah. But the Rambam writes that the reason for this yontif is because of the victory of the Maccabim against the Greeks. The whole yontif is not about the oil and the menorah, rather it's about the fact that the Jewish people reclaimed Israel, and the monarchy was brought back to Jewish people, and that's what the miracle is about. And then he mentions afterwards the miracle of the oil. The miracle of the oil is mentioned afterwards, but the main thing he says is we won. So the Rambam defines the miracle as having to do with the victory of war, and the cruse of oil is mentioned afterwards. And the Gemara only mentions, or primarily mentions, the miracle of the oil. So to explain this, let's go over a more fundamental question. The question is, on the Gemara, if indeed we were suffering, and we were a minority, and we were under the rulership of the Greeks, and didn't allow us to keep Torah mitzvahs, why indeed does the Gemara say that the miracle has nothing to do with the victory of war, just because they found the cruse of oil? How they make the main thing to be secondary, and secondary thing to be the main thing? What's more important? So because of this great question, the Rambam holds that when the Gemara says, what is Chanuka? The Gemara's question isn't, why did they make it to be a yantif? Rather, the Gemara's question is, why do we say Hallel? The Gemara's question isn't, the yantif is obvious, the Rambam says. The Gemara is not asking what the yantif is. The yantif is obvious, we were suffering under the hands of the Greeks, and now we were victorious, now we were free. That's the yantif. You don't have to ask what the yantif is. The Gemara's question is, why Hallel? Had we not found the cruse of oil, had the menorah not been lit for 8 days, we still would have had a day to celebrate the victory. There still would have been 1 day of joy. So Gemara's question is about the detail that we say Hallel. And the Gemara answers, you know why we say Hallel for 8 days? That's because of the miracle of the oil. So the Rambam continues on and discusses at length the events of Chanuka, and he concludes, and this is why they established these days to be days of joy and Hallel. That means there's two kinds of events, and because these two different kinds of events, the victory of war and the discovery of the menorah. By the way, my computer looks I'm getting little things on the computer. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So there's two different kinds of events. There is the victory, the physical victory, the fact that we're saved from the hands of the Greeks. And because of that, we have simcha. And because we discover the cruse of oil and lasts for 8 days, because of this, we have Hallel. Simcha is connected to the salvation, the physical salvation. And the Hallel is mainly to do with the miracle of the oil. So now we can understand why the Rambam puts us into two halachas. The Rambam, every halacha, the way the Rambam classifies what is considered halacha is very important. As everyone once mentioned, that the Rambam, his classification of halachas he actually has pertinence to laws of capital punishment. For example, the halacha is, if Reuben says to Leah, be married to me on condition that I know one halacha. What's one halacha? So according to the Rambam, whatever it says is halacha, that's halacha. So they're only considered married if this person knows a whole halacha in Rambam. So the Rambam writes in two halachas to emphasize that these two events are associated with two halachas. The first event is associated with the laws of happiness, the laws of the meal, and the second event, the laws of Hallel, are associated with the discovery of the oil. It's obvious that the Rambam won't make up something himself. And the Rambam's basis for this comes from the language of the Ahlanissim and the language of our sages in the Talmud, from other places in the Talmud. And it's possible that the Rambam also had Medrash Chanuka. So that's why the Rambam writes many things here which aren't mentioned in the Gemara. The Rambam mentions how they made decrees against Jewish people and how they put their hands out to attack the Jewish people and Jewish women. And so the Rambam isn't inventing something himself. He knows this from other places in the Talmud. He says that the part in the Talmud which says that what is Chanukah, that discussion in the Talmud is only what's the reason for saying Hallel. So that's the reason why the Rambam says that we have to have meals at this time, because this holiday is about celebrating the victory of war as well. We say Hallel because of the miracle of the candles, and we have a festive meal because of the miracle of over the Greeks. And now we have to explain why those things why that's true. Why is the miracle of discovering the oil associated with Hallel, and why is the miracle of the victory of war, why is that associated with a festive meal? Simcha is associated with the body. As the Talmud says, there's no joy except with meat, there's no joy except with wine. But Hallel is associated with the heart, to the neshama. And therefore, the fact that we're saved from the Greeks, and that's something that happened to our bodies. And therefore, the sages established, what do we do to celebrate a miracle that happened to our bodies? Something with our bodies. We have a festive meal. But the miracle of the crucive oil, the fact that we're able to light the Beis Hamikdash, the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash, that's a spiritual salvation. And therefore, they established something spiritual to do at that time, at these days, which is to say Hallel. Okay, so according to this explanation of the Rambam, at the Gemara's question, when it asks what is Chanukah, the Gemara is not asking what is Chanukah in general. The Gemara is asking why do we say Hallel. The reason we have Chanukah, the Rambam says, is because of the victory. But the question the Gemara is only asking is about why do we say Hallel. According to this, we could also understand the words of the Mordechai. Mordechai writes the following: Megillas Tainis Amru Shakovum Yumeant B'Shem Chanukas HaMizbeach V'Chen Kasav V'Zerub V'Chen Kasav Medeshaba V'Acha. The Mordechai says that they established the Yontiv because of the miracle of the candles. I'm sorry. The Mordechai says that in Megillas Tainis it says they established Yontif because they inaugurated the altar, and the Gemara says they established the Yontif because of the miracle of the candles. So the Mordechai says that the reason why it's days of joy and simcha, that was because of the. Hold on a second. Yeah, the reason why it's day of Simcha and Simcha is because of the victory of the Maccabim, and okay, sorry about this. Basically, the Mordechai also, like the Rambam, says that Chanukah has two components. There's one component which is associated with joy, and another component which is associated with Hallel. One component which is associated with the meals we have on Chanukah, and one component which is associated with the lighting of the menorah and the Hallel we say on Chanukah. But unlike the Rambam, who says that the main reason we have festive meals on Chanukah is because of the victory of the Maccabim, the Mordechai says the reason we have festive meals on Chanukah is because of the inauguration of the Beis Hamikdash. The fact that Beis Hamikdash was inaugurated, and that's why it becomes a day of joy. According to the Rambam, the reason why it's a day of joy is just because Hashem saves us. So basically, because we have the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh, the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef, he always rules like the majority of these three Amudei Hara, these three pillars of halachic guidance, the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. So since the Rif and the Rosh, they don't bring down what the Rambam says, they disagree, and they say the main thing of Chanukah is only about the candles and what the Gemara says and Hallel. Therefore, the halacha is you do not have to have a festive meal on Chanukah. But That's what the Beis Yosef paskins. But the reason why the Ram disagrees is because the Rambam and the Mordechai disagrees because they find that Chanukah also has another component. So bottom line is that Chanukah has these two elements. Yes, the halacha is that we do not have to have the festive meals, but again, the Rebbe says that because of the greater darkness and gullus, it's a important that we should add in light and make these festive meals as well, and they have a basis also in the Rambam and halacha. Just because something is not officially halacha doesn't mean that it doesn't that we don't have a reason to do it. There's some things which we do as a custom, although they're not there's no obligation to according to halacha. And that's the basic idea that Rebbe presents in the Sikha. Any questions or comments? All right. Have a wonderful Yontiv, Yontiv David, Yontiv Dr. Bressman, Yontiv Zoom user, whoever you are.
Well, what's the basis for Mordechai saying that it had to do with the dedication of the altar, whereas Rambam seems to make a very good point that we have to get into the physical aspect, celebrate the physical aspect with the Suda, since it was a physical battle. And that makes sense, but Mordechai doesn't give a reason for his statement.
The Mordechai has a source in Megillas Tainus. The truth is, Megillas Tainus itself, the different versions of Megillas Tainus. In the version that the Mordechai had, it says that the reason we have this Yontiv is because of the inauguration of the Mizbeach. So he had a clear source for it. The question I'm wondering though is like, why? What does the inauguration of the Beis Hamikdash have to do with a physical? Why does that have to do with the physical, with Simcha? It's also a spiritual thing. But I guess the inauguration of the Beis Hamikdash is also a physical thing as well. I mean, that maybe that represents the Jewish people won the war, and that was like, that's like the to me, that like, you know, that's like raising the flag. Once you win the war, and now we have the Beis Hamikdash. It could be, but that doesn't. It doesn't directly ask this question. I don't know. The Levush writes something interesting. The Levush writes, since the Yevonim only were interested in us, they weren't interested in killing us. They were only interested in us in us leaving Yiddishkeit. Therefore, it's not considered days of joy, because they weren't really interested in killing us. According to the Rambam, since the fact is that they did attack us, therefore it's a day of joy. The Levush says their motive wasn't to kill us. Their motive was just to make us assimilate.
I think there was a big machlokes between the Jewish people at the time. And who won? It was really the Haskalah who actually won the battle.
What do you mean? The From Yidden won?
From Yidden, but they were against the Kahuna.
The From Yidden were against the Kahuna?
There was a whole thing. There was like corruption and this and that. That's why there was a big machlokes.
You're reading the Gemara, reading Yosefus?
No.
Gemara says that the two miracles that we won.
But there's a machlokes between the Gemara and the actual story of Hanukkah.
The Gemara is emphasizing one element of the miracle. The Ram says the Gemara is only analyzing the.
And the Rambam brings them all together. The Rambam brings them together. That's what the Rebbe is doing. The Rebbe is saying we should celebrate Hanukkah. We should be the same. The whole Jewish people.